And we're live with our 264th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. This one is a long time in coming. We are super excited to have Jeremy Long on the podcast with us. When we went back through our history of podcast episodes and realized we hadn't had Jeremy on in that whole run, I was rather surprised, to be honest, right? Like, we've known Jeremy for a long time, so we'll get into that shortly. Before we do, just a couple of housekeeping items. Watch training.absoluteappsec.com. There is going to be an opportunity to take our new course, Generative AI for Software Security, right? Where we're going to dig into the uses of generative AI, what we're actually doing there. That's training.absoluteappsec.com. Otherwise, there are going to be additional opportunities with the secure code review course, that is in addition there, but we're taking those bits that are interesting from a software security perspective on the source code, but also extrapolating that out to threat modeling and a couple of other things and teaching you how to use those LLMs and generative AI. So watch that space. I did want to give a shout out today to Dry Run Security. They are our sponsors. Dry Run Security delivers near instant security code reviews and fills as if you've just hired a team of the best AppSec code reviewers. It gathers security context in just seconds after a developer makes a change. From that gathered context, the company's proprietary code review process interrogates each code change based on behaviors, not just static patterns. Try it for free yourself at dryrun.security. So thanks to Dry Run, thanks to our sponsors. If you are interested in sponsoring, please reach out, info@absoluteappsec.com or directly to me, Seth@absoluteappsec.com. I think that's everything from a logistics perspective. So Jeremy, right? Let's get into it. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here. There were employer reasons why I was not on this before. It was very hard to do. Right. It was very hard at a previous employer to do any public speaking at all, anything. The speaking I did for a long time, I had to go through many reviews just to get allowed to do it, etc. So for many reasons, I'm so excited to be at my current job in comparison to where I was.
Yeah, I was basically pestering Jeremy very frequently to come on the podcast now for years. So, and it was because of work. And but I'm stoked you're here. We have so much to get into, and your background's like incredible. The work you've done is incredible. So, not to hype you up too much, and
I know everybody's like, oh, the work that you've done is great. Everybody loves it. Everybody uses it. And I've actually had this conversation with a few people. Very few people actually know me.
They know your work.
Yeah.
They know my work. And the second you're like, oh, you're the guy, like, hi, I'm Jeremy Long. You're like, okay, great. I wrote Dependency Check. Oh, you.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I helped shepherd in the entire SCA industry, but because of my employer, I didn't really do a lot of talking. I just provided a tool.
Yeah, we gave a talk, Seth and I, in Australia. I think was it last month? Yeah, I think it's last month.
Yeah, last month. Yep.
Yeah, and we talked about you and how known vulnerable components being included in the OWASP came out right when your dependency check tool also came out, and that was sort of when we sort of see like folks like Sonatype kind of leaning heavily into this space, and it really did launch like the SCA kind of movement.
I know that you guys said that you want to get in a little bit of the origin story, but we'll do the origin story of dependency check really quick.
Okay.
I started at my day job. I was at Wells Fargo at the time, and I was on a code review team. We did literally, when I started in 2005 at doing code review, it was line by line manual code review.
Yeah.
No tools, because they didn't really exist. I mean, Fortify wasn't available in 2005. Check marks, no. None of this stuff was available. So it was line by line manual review. I learned so much about application security when you're just handed a million lines of code and said, figure it out. What's, from a security perspective, what's wrong? You don't even get the running application in that job. You just got the source code.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's like,
how
it's
works
wild. And you just have to dig in, figure out how it works. And, things evolved. We eventually used tools, but I think it was around 2007, 2008, we started citing vulnerabilities around the libraries that were being used, because you'd have things like, struts was being used or something. And you could go out to, what were all the old sites like Secunia? There was like three or four different websites. That you
Bug
could go
track
out.
wasn't Bug Track. Yeah.
Bug Track,
Yeah.
Secunia. Again, I'm blanking on what all the stuff existed back in like 2000, before 2010. And so we ended up building like a few iterations. Like we would manually go research, and then somebody was like, I'm sick of doing this. And so they built like something that you could just put your keywords in and hit search, and it would open up 5 browser tabs to search the 5 different websites. And I was like, this is all janky. And like, I'm like, we can do better. And so I started in my spare time. I just started writing in 2011. It eventually, took a while to get there. But in 2011, I started writing Dependency Check. It was an internal tool at Wells Fargo that the security code review team was using. And I had gotten it to a point, and basically I went to management and said, if we really want to make this good, it would be best if we just open source this. I had to talk to the patent team, legal, architecture. Like I had talked to so many teams to get this thing open sourced, but eventually everybody said, make it happen. And then OWASP was good enough to take it in as one of the projects. And because of that, the OWASP name, it helped draw in some other key contributors. In some cases it was people I've known. In some cases it was people I met, like Steve Springett, who is now on the board. Steve's awesome. He did a lot of contributions early, but then spun off to do Dependency Track and a lot of amazing work on SBOMs in general. But we had people contributing from Bank of America, Citi, I believe, did some contributions. ThoughtWorks over at IBM had some contributions, and this helped build the ecosystem so that we ended up getting .NET, Python, and other, because I built a base framework that was a pipeline of analyzers that you could extend and add more analyzers to. And it just grew and grew, and it seems like everybody uses it, but I really haven't done very many talks on it. I've done a few talks at OWASP, and I did a talk at Java 1 once, thanks to Jim Manico. But I haven't done a lot of talks directly about Dependency Check. And so I'm just glad that it just has virally grown, partially through OWASP. OWASP has done a lot of, that's a good way to get your name out.
Also, the need, I would assume, I mean, the needs.
And
there,
the need,
that's kind
is like, I've done, in a few of the talks I've done, I've always talked about the use case for Dependency Check. And the use cases are, if you don't have a tool, if you don't even have an AppSec program. I know a guy who was brought in, I think, as a pen tester to 2 different companies in Europe. And because of Dependency Check, he ended up getting an entire AppSec program started at both companies.
Oh, wow.
Because he was able to just take this tool, and this is one of the primary use cases. If you're not doing anything, you need to be at least this tall to ride the internet. I mean,
yeah. Well,
if you're not doing anything, you got to do something.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, that's where it has fit so well into like that corporate mentality is, okay, where do we start? Right. Like, what can we do?
Right.
And like when I'm doing training with developers, right? Like dependency check was always on that list of what do I do today? Like, okay, yeah, we talked about SQL injection. We talked about like the OWASP top 10. What can I
Right.
go and do with my code base today? And I'm like, let's start with the dependencies, right? Like, let's start with dependency check and actually just go scan and see what we're up against before we go to anything else.
Right.
And it surprises me that you like you really haven't spoken that much. I guess, you know, with the corporate restrictions that were in place, right? Like at previous jobs, it doesn't. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons. Like I did a couple of local meetups. I was able to speak at Java 1, but that was a small talk. It wasn't recorded. And a couple of talks at that, like AppSec US, but I wasn't really out there, you know, partly because I wasn't in a consulting role. I was not trying to sell myself or my business. I'm just out there trying to, like, honestly, people have always asked me, like, this is one of the best things about dependency check. When do you think the last time I've actually officially used it was?
I mean, for me, it was like last week, right? But yeah,
it was published in 2012. When do you think I last officially used it?
2020. No.
2014, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Jeremy, what are we doing here? Yeah.
Well, no, the difference is I've been using commercial tools. And part of the reason behind the use of commercial tools is the database of vulnerabilities is there's more. I mean, Sneak, Sonatype, and others who are doing SCA do a ton of research and find vulnerabilities that may not be in the NVD. And they also take some of the things that are in the NVD and enrich them in ways. They might change the score. Like, for instance, I think there's some CVEs against curl that I think the NVD has rated as like critical, even though the entire curl development, the entire curl development staff of, I think, one, the primary, I'm even blanking on the gentleman's name, but he's like that. There's no way this is a critical. This is like informational just because of the nature of the exploit, but it was like a buffer overflow. And so the NVD is like, oh, this is critical.
Yeah.
And so they come in and they adjust things. And because they're the commercial source, there's a lot of benefits to having some of the commercial tools. Support being one of the primary reasons, one of the primary things. We do our best, but it's basically right now we have a handful of people who answer questions, help out, do some limited PRs. Hans, who has been doing a ton of really great work over the last couple of years, and myself. It's a very small team that actually maintains dependency check right now. And I know that like one of the people I ran into, she was like, yeah, we use it, or I used it when I was doing my internship. It was a really great tool. I thought it was like a whole team maintaining them. I'm like, nope, it's primarily like 2 guys with a few other PRs and some people answering questions.
Yeah. Well, welcome to open source projects, right? Like that's the the XKCD of that, everything that depends on it, and there's that small like 2 people that are actually maintaining that core functionality, right?
Is
that the person, the link I put in, Hans, is that the correct person? I just want to, if it is, I'm going to share it.
Yes. No, that's absolutely.
Perfect. Cool.
Yeah. He's been doing a lot of great work, and like just some of the people who've been contributing, like answering questions and helping out. Like I've been amazed at the quality of some of these people. I believe he goes by Vampire. He's actually one of the people that works on Gradle.
Oh, well, you can't get much better than that.
And he's actually done some pull requests for the Gradle plugin and things like that. So yeah, we've had a lot of really amazing people helping out with the tool, but at its core, it's been basically me and Hans have been doing most of it over the last couple of years.
To your point about NVD and vendors having a bigger scope, I mean, we've had Endor Labs on, who, you know, they put out their dependency state of dependency 2024 report. So we covered that, and they said as much, right? They were like, well, you know, the NVD has its issues or limitations, or it's one data source, however you want to look at it. So OSV is becoming, you know, more popular, or not more, I shouldn't say more popular, but becoming another additional source that's popular to pull from. Which I'm a little, I think it includes the GHSA, the GitHub security advisories.
It includes the NVD, the security advisories, and a couple other. It's kind of conglomerating a bunch of things together into a single source. And there is an open ticket on dependency check or issue. And eventually we probably will migrate to a different data source as opposed to just the NVD, because it'll become more accurate when we do. One of the big problems with doing the analysis is that there was never a mapping between what a developer called a dependency and what security called a dependency. Security absolutely had to put the vendor name in there because it was your fault. Like literally, like if you go back to Spring 3.0, when Spring traded owners 3 times because it was Spring Pivotal, Spring PM VMware Pivotal. There are CVEs against Spring 3.0. They may have been corrected since, but they did exist. Different CVEs. Some would be against the VMware version of Spring. Some would be against Pivotal version of Spring, and some would be Spring Source version of Spring 3.0. And it's just like, none of this maps to what a developer calls it. Like, I don't even think Spring Source is in the name. It's just, you know, I forget what the group name is on Spring, but it's, you know, the artifacts are like Spring Core and stuff. So, I mean, the disconnect between what security was calling things and what developers were calling things made it hard. And that's one of the problems that I tried to solve with dependency check. Is I actually used a Lucene in a very backwards way. Because I would have normally, if you know what Lucene is, it's something that you could like index the Library of Congress and then do queries against. I indexed 2 words, and through a search query of everything I could find about the dependency, does anything match? So it was like an index of just like every document was just 2 words, and just, you know, seeing if we could find a match that way. So I was using it in a very backwards way, but it worked. And that's the core of dependency check, and why it was so successful early on. But now, as we're getting some of these other data sources, they're actually putting the package URL in there. And lo and behold, when you have something that's based on standards, you can actually kind of go, well, the package URL, it doesn't always exactly match, but you can get there. And so the package URL is so much better than the common platform enumeration.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's interesting how the space has evolved, right? Like from a you know, a tooling perspective, like we were coming at it from a security. Like I dig that, like you were looking at it from a developer perspective, even way back in the day, right? Like the security stuff that was coming. I mean, I remember looking at those security focused, like, you know, newsletters and stuff, and like all the alerts that would come out, and you're like, I can't do anything with this, right? You're like, Apache is vulnerable, and you're like, where, what, why? And if you look back, right, and I know we've talked about Jerry Gamblin and some of the research that he's done there too, like we're much better at actually standardizing what's coming out of OSV,
Yeah.
NVD, and actually like putting some requirements around the people that are reporting the bugs. It still is pretty loose, and there's still work to be done, but we're in a much better state. And then I think about the exploitability that's going into it now. That research is exciting.
Oh, absolutely. From first.org, the EPSS.
Yes.
I actually did a talk at the inaugural Loco Sec. I totally blanking on what year it was. I know you were there, Ken.
I think it was 2019, or was it the first one?
Yeah, it was the very first one.
2018, I think. Yeah.
Okay. It was 2018, somewhere in that time frame. It's actually on YouTube. It's the Application Patching Manifesto was the title of it. And it was basically being a proponent of tools like Renovate, Greenkeeper, Dependabot. This was before GitHub had acquired Dependabot. And I was basically like, we have all of these vulnerabilities. Patching is not part of the development lifecycle at all. It's one of those things where anytime like Log4j comes out, or the struts or the Spring remote code execution, like this is a panic time for developers, because many of them haven't spent a lot of time upgrading and regression testing their applications. It's not part of their daily routine, unfortunately, because I've seen applications over the years where you're like, wow, that library has 5 major versions since you put it in here, and they're like, yeah, it still works. There's no bugs. Why touch it?
Yeah,
we're using this
stable.
one single function from it. It's stable. Why touch it? But because we were getting all of the issues around CVEs, I was being a proponent of patch everything all the time. Now, that has its pros and cons. You have to have a very good test suite to do that. And it is very hard to do on monoliths, but anything that you're doing, microservices, small applications, patch everything all the time. It is a great mantra on that.
A very good pipeline. Yeah. It's very well-structured.
Well-structured
pipeline,
back,
but running your tests and getting everything.
Yeah, and that's when tools like Dependabot, Renovate, Greenkeeper, I'm sure I'm missing other variants of that, are great. They're fantastic. But on the flip side, and I know we mentioned that we want to talk about EPSS and the known exploited vulnerability. On the flip side, when you get into monoliths, I actually know companies who have explicitly banned these automated batching tools by name because they physically ship software, and one of the teams upgraded something using one of these automated tools. It got passed through all of their testing, all their regression testing, and was shipped, and it caused a major issue.
Yeah.
And so a policy went in place at that company. These tools are banned. You will not be doing automated upgrades, period. You can still do upgrades, but you can't just, blindly upgrade everything all the time. And it makes sense, especially if you're, for some scenarios, especially monoliths, because you can have, I'd almost say spooky interactions sometimes where unexpected, just because of how big it is. This one thing didn't get tested, or, as much as you would like to have 100% test coverage, sometimes you probably don't. And so in those cases, they really do. And so in those cases, how do you know what you need to patch? I mean, there are things that if you are because of the executive orders and everything that's been coming out since, there are mandates that you may be under to patch almost everything within an X period of time. But for everybody else that isn't under some of those stricter mandates, what do you patch? And do you need to patch everything? And that's why I love the work from first.org with the EPSS, because it gives you, they're actually going out and researching, like, are there indications that this is or will be exploited within a certain amount of time, et cetera. You'd have to go read the full write-up on EPSS. It's some fantastic work that they're doing. And basically they rate all the CVEs, and anything that comes up as a fairly high on the EPSS, I'd say, yeah, you probably should patch that sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there's also from CISA.org, the Known Exploited Vulnerability Catalog. This is another thing from the US government where it's a list of vulnerabilities that they know to have been exploited. That's just what's on their website. I don't know any more about that, any of the details. Whether or not they were successful, I have no idea, but they know that there is something there, and they are requiring all federal agencies to patch within 30 days of publication to anything on that. And I believe that then also trickles down to the not just the agencies, but their vendors,
providers.
Well.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I did at one point was actually compare the EPSS to the known exploited vulnerability, thinking, the EPSS and should have a high correlation with the known exploited vulnerability, because, if EPS is doing things correctly, the things that are exploited should have a high score. And what you find when you just do that analysis raw is there's next to no correlation. And it took no. There's actually an explanation, and there's a really good explanation. And I asked Jerry Gamblin on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, about this, and he actually gave me a really solid answer and the explanation behind it. The known exploited vulnerability catalog contains local exploits. You will never see those with a high EPSS score.
I see. Yeah, it's got to be remote. Oh, okay, I see.
And that's why
remotely exploitable versus locally exploitable.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of things there that have a local exploit. And so that accounts for some of the difference.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's other nuances as to what other differences, but that was one of the major reasons for why things just totally don't line up. I have not yet gone back and filtered the local from the Kev to see how it lines up, but in just like some brief conversations, I've been told that it lines up a bit better. But I haven't validated that myself.
And I would, and on that point, right? Like, for those listening, right? Like, if you're unfamiliar with it, those local exploits are probably being used in a, like tool chain or an exploit chain scenario, right? Somebody gets access to a network, and then you see them use a local exploit to increase their privileges or what have you to get access to additional resources once they've actually established that foothold, right? Like in a known exploit. So
they can pivot
more. And so I guess that does, that is a good explanation on why you would actually see that coming from the government, because they're probably monitoring using some of their like local tools as well as what they're seeing, honeypots, et cetera, to actually like see what other agencies and other government orgs are doing or, in the wild. So
right.
That's interesting. So along those lines, right? Like from a dependency check perspective, like it sounds like you're starting to target OSV, like you do have plans to migrate,
We're going to migrate to something else. We
haven't
settled on the OSV. That is a likely candidate. I just time.
Well, it's two of you, right? Like,
it's that, and like I have a family. This is my daughter's senior year of high school, so I want to make sure that I get as much time there as I can. So, it's a constant struggle of, I don't use the tool. And so a lot of the development work on this has been between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. when everybody else in this house is asleep.
Yeah.
Squeezing some time in where you can.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on because it's like so one EPSS, really nice, helps sort of narrow down what matters. Another reachability analysis is a highly discussed topic. I'll give you just one thing that I kind of have noticed from our conversations with those that are doing it, though, is that it's a highly intensive manual process to review these issues for, like discovering basically like the function names that you'd have to invoke or the way you'd have to use that library for it to be vulnerable. So it's kind of, it's limiting. It's limiting.
And
it's intense.
That is yet another reason why commercial tools. Because if you're trying to do that just for yourself, that's incredibly difficult. If you're a vendor who is doing that for all of your customers, well, then it's more of a tenable solution, or not solution, but you can solve that because you can put resources, because you have contracts paying for that.
Yeah, and I do think, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, I thought I heard that OSV now has an option to give those function names or those ways that not everybody's obviously using that, but
I would have to go look. I have not seen if that. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, and like I said, I could be totally off on that. I wonder if that section was actually filled out, if it would make it easier to do this analysis. But to your point, it is like the two vendors we talked to are SendGrip and Endor, who are doing that reachability analysis. But again, it's like, how many hours in a day do you have to go through all of these? And I guess you could prioritize based off of something like EPSS in theory, and say like, okay, well, these are the ones we want to figure out. Yeah.
And one of the other ways that I know people kind of attempt to do that is, and I actually talked to a PhD student in France back in like 2010 about this, 2010, 2011 timeframe about this. And they were automating diffing the patches.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they were finding is, it was really, you could diff the patches if once you were able to figure out exactly where this was fixed, you were able to diff the patches and narrow down those functions that were being called, etc. And that was one way of doing it, but they always ran into things like occasionally they would run into things where the fix was a configuration file.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, but what did that affect?
Right.
I know back in the day,
changing the source, you have to go through the source to figure out where that configuration option's used, and then how. Like you have to that leads to a whole other set of questions you have to answer.
And like that specific case that I was talking to them about, I think it was a struts CVE. That code base is massive. And I know struts is kind of like not being used, even though there is a struts one forever project. Thank you. It's the gift that keeps on giving to security.
It's just Seth running it behind the scenes. Over there.
Yeah, no. No. But I mean, like, to understand, for somebody to go in and understand how a single configuration file in that build affected the framework, good luck. And then the other thing that I always question about some of the reachability analysis that I've seen being done, not that I'm saying don't do it. I think it's fantastic. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to understand and And in a lot of cases, I've seen things when you actually look at the code, it's a transitive dependency that's vulnerable. And in your call chains, you never even call into that transitive dependency. You could just put an exclude and your app's going to run totally fine. And so I've seen things like that where you can just even, especially on some of the transitives, you can, depending on how heavily you're using that, just the library itself may not even be actually used. But I lost my train of thought on some of the reachability analysis there.
I mean, I definitely think that if people could get more it's difficult because like of what you're saying is that requires so much of the people that are doing the digging. It's like, wouldn't it be more helpful? Sorry, this is me saying this though. Wouldn't it be more helpful to just have that information out the gate when these things are released, and then that
when
way
you
we can, yeah,
if you
just
were
automate that.
when I'm responding to the vulnerability, I'm like, hey, it was it was this package, this function. Yeah, that would be very helpful because it's real easy to look at call graphs.
Yeah, that's much
Call
right.
graphs are really simple as long as you don't have too much inversion of control. It's really simple.
Yeah, so it's I mean, and honestly, I think like from what everything you said, it does sound like there's these multiple ways and multiple data sources that all kind of have to be cleverly combined in order to get something that is, and this is why I think we see this is, again, my very heavy opinionated stance here is that I think this is why we see companies that really have gone all in on just SCA. They don't really tackle much else because that is such a difficult space to live in. And to your point, one thing that we keep hearing and going back to like why this is so critical, I say we, like, because I have to, or not have to, because I talk to a lot of people through the process of getting to know like what are their problems and how we could solve them. We hear over and over again, the question about SCA, and then they say sort of like what their problem is with it. And it is primarily just getting these alerts, getting even pull requests open, and then just developers being like, no, we can't do that, or it doesn't make sense, or closing it down. And so you get all these like sort of this backlog of to-dos and things that are consistently ignored just because it's so freaking hard to figure out what actually matters. And yeah, some vendors are great or better at doing that than others, but also like again, the one thing with vendors too is that you, in any vendor situation, and you're also like, what do they support today versus what am my developers going to adopt tomorrow situation as well. So it's just I feel like SEA is like one of the harder problem spaces out of all of them at this point.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. Kind of.
Well,
let me say it's one of the more important to get right because once the vulnerabilities are out there, they're public. I think the reports are some of the reports right now are saying once a CVE is published, we start seeing within 5 days exploits against things.
Well, and that's, I mean, and that's,
turnaround.
That's part of the problem. And as being a consultant, right? Like what I'm seeing across the board as I deal with organizations is that the SCA tools, like there's not a lot of context, number one, right? Like that goes into it, right? Like we're honing in on reachability analysis, exploit analysis, right? Like whether or not they're vulnerable to it. But the sheer amount of data that's coming to the developers from these SCA tools is on par with what we saw early in the static analysis days, where there's thousands and thousands of alerts that are popping up, and and everything's rated, medium to critical, right? and they look at it and they're like, well, this is like this one web service that's internal, like there's no context,
right?
And they're overwhelmed. And so what did the developers do, right? They just basically, they ignore it. It becomes noise that's on every single pull request, that's on every single, right? And they're like, hey, what do we need to take care of? They kick it over to the security team, to the one AppSec guy that's over there, who basically has no time. And so like we're starting to look at vendors to actually analyze and to actually do this analysis,
Yeah.
but it hasn't caught up, right?
And I will say that the quantity of vulnerabilities coming out is going to be a little bit dependent on your tech stack.
Oh yeah. But I
Um,
like think about Java, think about these like large like enterprise applications that were built 10 to 15 years
Yep.
ago. I mean exactly what dependency check is finding, right? And
Yep.
nowadays. And all it does is it compounds, right? Okay, it was 20, it was 2000 findings yesterday, and now today it's 2020, right? Like it's just this like constant increase.
Right. Yeah. But I've heard even more horror stories when you get into like Node.
JavaScript.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
just
Well, I
just
had a
because of the way the
ball
package management is, like, I'm going to create a package for one line of code.
Mhm. Module
Okay.
counts, right? Like how many modules or how many packages are available in the Node ecosystem now? It's like
Yeah.
3 million plus, and they
Yeah.
add 1,000 a day, right? So
And
they're buying.
that's, yeah.
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 And I know when everybody starts talking about SCA, they always kind of eventually start getting into supply chain, which is the natural evolution of SCA. Um, and when you talk about the supply chain risks, like I know that some of the like container scanning type things, tools, which are producing the same, SCA type vulnerabilities. I mean, especially when you put your application on there, it's going to be like, oh, I see that jar file and here's the CVE for it. But they're also putting in malware and other things that are not in CVEs. And so we end up with this whole new host of problems. And it just gets bigger and bigger the more we go into into the supply chain, and everybody then starts it's a whole new set of tools that you need to acquire or look
Mhm.
at, and it's just this never ending.
Well, I mean, and that
Founding
yeah,
problematic
it
set
leads to
of
that.
dependencies from every
Yeah,
different piece of tooling you're now involved in beyond the application. Yeah. Sorry, Seth.
it's
You know,
That's yeah.
no, it's almost like and that's what I go back to with the number of vulnerabilities, right? Like it's almost this like crisis of data that we're starting to have here.
yep,
Is like, okay, yeah, we've got all like the image scanning that's going on, we've got everything that's coming out of the network scanning that's we've done for years, the vulnerability scanning, like the network vuln.
yep,
Now we've got like ASPM tools that are telling us all about the applications and are summarizing SCA plus SAS plus DAST, right? Like all of that. And then we're expecting our AppSec team or our developers to be experts on that and be able to tell us what can be reachable. It's just like I see,
and
and this is why I go back to consulting, right? Like I see teams that are overwhelmed,
yep,
overworked, and don't know where to turn, and like just walking in there and being like, hey guys, like if we can just like limit the bleeding, we're doing really well in comparison with other organizations, because it becomes an organization maturity thing as opposed to
right.
just a hey, can we identify these vulnerabilities?
And I know, like, I'm listening to some of these conversations. It's like we're just trying to stop the bleeding and maybe patch a few things and everything. And like some of the research, like the talk I did at Black Hat and other things that I'm working on are so much farther ahead of where most companies are. Like some of the stuff that I've been working on are, like I was talking about in at Black Hat in 2023. I did a talk on reflections on trusting trust in the software supply chain,
Yeah.
and it was kind of like talking about what we're doing with like Salsa and supply chain and everything that we did to answer solar winds and some of these other types of events that have happened. And it keeps coming back to everything that I see being done works great if you're a good and honest company, set of developers doing the right thing. But the second you are malicious or use a malicious dependency or malicious plugin, all bets are off, because that malicious dependency or malicious plugin can affect other things.
Yeah.
Can affect other things on the system. And so you're like, oh, we created this document and we signed it and everything's secure, but there's this component running that also put stuff there or modified it. And so it's just, it's this never ending fun of, as we get into supply chain, people are talking, looking at how we built things. And what I find fascinating is not a lot of people are asking about how we build things in the application world, but in Gen AI, that's a common question. How are you building that model? How are you doing this? What's going into it? Because there's actually people doing valid questioning the security of things at that level, but we still haven't gotten enough people looking at how the sausage is made at the application level, because there's so many opportunities beyond our traditional SCA type stuff that something could maliciously affect your build. It's not even that CVE, are you scanning your build plugins for CVEs? Probably not. Dependency check can for Maven and Gradle. And you're probably not. And if there was, I don't know of any right now, but if there was a CVE in one of your build plugins, would you even know? And could that build plugin have dropped a backdoor into your application, a la Ken Thompson's Reflection on Trusting Trust?
Yeah.
Which, if you have not read Ken Thompson's paper, Reflections on Trusting Trust, it's a short 3-page article in the Communications of the ACM. Highly recommend reading it to me, from 1984, almost a foundational paper on security. It'll really make you think about everything.
Yeah.
So
everything. I did want to ask just real quick, because you had mentioned Salsa and I kind of wanted to get supply chain levels for software artifacts.
Right.
For those that are uninitiated, can you give like a brief description of Salsa?
It's kind of supposed to be a software assurance levels, a list of different activities that you would be doing at the different assurance levels to ensure that the build output that you're producing is secure. It has been signed. Okay, sorry. I want to take a step back from everybody else who's been talking about Salsa and correct that word. I don't mean to say secure, because everybody uses that word. You have the provenance. You have a chain of custody, a chain of evidence of how that thing was built, where the sources came from, what the compiler was used to build it. You've created kind of a manifest of how your product was built, and you've signed that chain of evidence, and you've created a hash, or you've signed that final build output, and you've published all of this so that people can validate that the thing that they got is really from you and the provenance is there, etc. I want to say everybody likes to throw the word in, proves that it's secure. No. There's nothing in there saying that it's secure. It's just saying that this is where it came from and these were the steps to produce it. Even though there are, I don't want to disparage it. It absolutely will improve things. But if you look at the beta of Salsa, it had things in there about running, about doing security tasks like static analysis and other things, which aren't in, at least not in the last draft I looked at, they're not in there. So how do you know it's secure? You haven't done the security testing. You know what was in there. You have the log, you have evidence so that if there was an event, you can go back and go, yep, that was the source code for that build. And so there's a lot of great information there, but I've never viewed this yet as a checkbox for, yes, it's secure. People can, yell at me all they want. Until I see something else in there, I just don't see it matching the security. And I talked about this at Black Hat in 2023, the talks on YouTube.
Yeah.
Although I think the version of the talk that I did at AppSec US might be a little better, but they're roughly the same.
I'll try to dig that up. Do you
Well,
have
and
any...
that's yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And no, I was just gonna refer back to Salsa a little bit, right? Like, I mean, it's interesting that we're having these standards start to pop out, right? Like, we've got like the SBOM stuff that's coming, and it's absolutely needed to, like, okay, what is the attribution? How are things put together? You're right, because we haven't necessarily seen that over time, right? Like, I think about even just the open source disclosures that come out of different commercial applications where they're required to actually tell you, oh, we're using FFmpeg. Right. We're using some of this software to build our like suite that we are providing to you. Like, that's right. Great detail to have. But until we know how that's made, like from a standard perspective, we can't tell you whether or not it's fully secure, or we can't certify it, right? Like, there's certain activities that we do. I always feel like we get our blinders on very specifically about security vulnerabilities and security exploits, right? Like, we do a pen test and we're like, oh, okay, check, we're secure. Like, somebody looked at our application, and we all know like that, in the security industry, that's not the case, right? Like, we're like, oh, we did this small test to make sure that we didn't have SQL injection on this web service, but we have all of this other stuff that is provided underneath the hood that could also have that same flaw, but we're just going to pretend like that doesn't exist, right?
That's out of scope.
That's out of scope. That was out of scope for this, right? That won't come into play. That's just our underlying, operating system or back end, like, whatever.
Yeah. We do what we can. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have unlimited resources. We have to ship product.
Yeah.
As an industry, that's just an industry statement. I mean, if we aren't shipping product, we're not getting paid.
Yeah. And it's not the developer's fault. It's even not the organization's fault, right? Like, we have to produce this, to your point, to get paid and, to stay alive as a business. And, like, there's all these different reasons. And so it becomes an exercise in, again, risk mitigation, context, realizing what our limitations are in order to actually to stay alive, basically. I don't know, right? Like, I'm starting to get nihilistic, right? Like, we should have Stefan and Logical on, because that's always like, it goes into that nihilism.
Right.
But what do you recommend then, Jeremy? Like, what is it that you recommend that developers or people that are in this space actually do, right?
If specifically taking a step back to narrow in on the SCA topic, I think you can do a lot of really good things by combining your EPSS and known exploited vulnerability catalog into your analysis. I mean, you even talk about like reachability analysis. That's great if you're using a commercial tool that does it. Fantastic. But more importantly is looking at the exploitable, how likely is it to be exploited from the EPSS scores? Is it known to have been exploited? Depending on your threat model for your organization, you may care about local, and you may care about everything on the known exploited catalog. That's something you're gonna have to make a decision as an organization. But I think you can do a lot just to minimize some of the noise from these tools. Now, ideally, you're patching everything all the time, but we know that the feasibility of that isn't always
unrealistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like with a small open source project like Dependency Check, yes, every time, security thing, it's like patch, yep, okay, patch, whatever. Although it is funny, there was a time there where I think even like maybe even in the last release or current release, there are like 2 or 3 CVEs again, like in the dependencies of Dependency Check. But there's reasons, and they're not exploitable. Like one of them is against the H2 database, because the web console, when you start it up, which we don't use, it'll output the admin password in the log.
Yep.
Critical.
That's actually in our course, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. Like that H2 database. Yeah.
It's
Critical.
Super funny call out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, critical finding. Yes.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot you can
do.
do with the EPSS and the Kev. That's where I would really start on building out a program if you do not have to answer to a regulated market.
Okay.
If you're in a regulated market, you're going to have to do a little bit more.
Good. Yeah, I mean, that's really good flavor. And I did want to be cognizant, right? Like we are at about an hour. Exactly. Like we didn't even get to your background, Jeremy. Like this is
we
exactly
kind of did, code review, but yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. But we will have to, I mean, now that you've come on once, we're going to have to do a follow-up for sure, because this is obviously a really interesting topic. And it's one that's really relevant to listeners and to us personally, right? Like we really appreciate the work that you've done, that you are doing, and the next time that we do a midsummer or midwinter nights con, you can come speak at that as well, because that's it'd be great to have your take on this. On all of this, right? Maybe we could even do a panel. We'll pull you and, and get Jerry. Oh wow, I'm blanking on names right now. And Jerry Gamblin into something to talk about just the state of software supply chain, SCA. Like it'd be an interesting thing to have that discussion go on.
Are you going to any conferences? You going to be anywhere traveling?
Nothing planned right now. I do think it's funny that everybody knows me. Like a lot of people know me for software composition analysis. And yet one of my buddies when he introduces me is like, this is one of the foremost experts on static analysis. like I may do SCA stuff on my, spare time and as a hobby to help the industry, but like my day job, static analysis is a ton.
Well, and that's And
if you ever want to talk about static analysis as well,
that's definitely want to talk about static analysis, but we need to do
another hour. Yeah, exactly. We'll figure out a part 2. We'll have our coordinator, like we'll reach back out, but we'll figure out something. And once we've had a little time to settle, and it'd be awesome to just do a part 2 and a follow up and dig into static analysis.
Yeah, genuinely, because I think it's. You and I have had, obviously, Jeremy, we've had conversations in person about this. And I know, I would love for folks to hear your thoughts and experiences. And you spent a long time. I mean, that's one thing we just didn't get into yet, which I'd love to, is like, I won't say the employer's name, but you were at this employer for a long time. You essentially built out that team. And the approach and the methodologies for SaaS SaaS / manual review. So anyways, and obviously that's a topic near and dear to Seth and I's heart. So we definitely need to schedule a part 2 and cover those topics.
No, absolutely. Cool. That'd be great.
Yeah. We'll have the coordinator reach out and we'll dive into it, because I do want to talk early days of Fortify. And the employer that you were at was like, I remember when Ken and I were at Fishnet, was a model of what we were trying to do from a static analysis perspective. And it really feeds into the secure code review stuff that we're doing. So yes, we're going to do a follow-up here. But we do appreciate the time and the thoughts today and the background. And If people have questions for you, like what is the best way for them to reach out? Like how would they contact you?
Twitter, LinkedIn,
Okay.
CTXT on Twitter, LinkedIn, just Jeremy Long with a lot of zeros.
Yeah. Awesome. We will attach that. And otherwise, like, I think that, it's probably a good spot to stop, because if we start going on, like, it's going to keep going. I know it will.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, those of you that are listening, thanks for taking part today. Ken, any final thoughts before we close it out?
No, I'm just so happy we finally got you on the podcast, and I definitely want to do a part 2. And just thanks for coming on. And like I said, I've been wanting this to happen forever, so it's just amazing that we finally got you on. And so just
cool.
Very thankful.
Yep,
absolutely. Great.
Yeah. Thanks to everybody that was listening. Thanks, Jeremy. And we'll see everybody online.
Sounds good.
Okay, ciao.
Bye.